The Concordiat had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Their massive ring-shaped stations orbited countless worlds, gleaming beacons of their technological superiority and unquestioned authority. They were the self-proclaimed guardians of civilization, the arbiters of which species would be uplifted and which would be left to languish in isolation. Their decisions were absolute, their judgments final. When humanity first achieved faster-than-light travel, the Concordiat barely noticed. Another primitive species stumbling into the galactic community, hardly worth monitoring beyond standard protocols. The preliminary reports painted a familiar picture, a fractious species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times, only recently unified enough to reach beyond their solar system. The first human diplomatic delegation arrived at Station Zero, the Concordiat's seat of power, in what they called the year 2157. The massive station's crystalline spires stretched for kilometers, housing representatives from over 300 species. The human ambassadors were quietly impressed, but not overwhelmed. This would prove prophetic. "Your species shows promise," Grand Arbiter Nexus had declared, his iridescent scales shifting in the artificial light. "But you must understand your place. There is order to the galaxy, protocols that have preserved peace for millennia. You will be assigned a protectorate status. Your expansion will be limited. Your technological development will be monitored. This is for the greater good." The human ambassadors exchanged glances. With respect, Ambassador Sarah Chen responded, "Humanity has its own plans for expansion and development. We're happy to coordinate with the Concordiat, but we won't be accepting protectorate status." The chamber fell silent. In 10,000 years, no species had ever rejected the Concordiat's terms. The Grand Arbiter's scales shifted to a deep crimson. "Perhaps I was unclear. This is not a negotiation. Neither are we negotiating," Chen replied calmly. "We're simply informing you of reality." The Concordiat's response was swift, and they believed proportionate. Trade restrictions, technology embargoes, diplomatic isolation, standard procedures that had brought countless species to heel. They expected humanity to quickly realize their mistake and accept their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. Instead, humanity thrived. Where the Concordiat blocked official trade routes, humans established underground networks. Where technology was denied, they innovated. Where diplomatic channels were closed, they built unofficial relationships with other species who had grown weary of Concordiat control. The Concordiat's next step was military intimidation. They dispatched a fleet to human space, not to attack, but to demonstrate their overwhelming superiority. The fleet emerged from hyperspace near Saturn, expecting to find a primitive civilization cowering before their might. They found instead a complex network of automated defense platforms that immediately began dismantling their ships with precision energy weapons that somehow bypassed their shields. Technology that shouldn't have been possible for centuries according to the Concordiat's careful development protocols. The fleet retreated, but the damage was done. Not to human defenses, which had barely been scratched, but to the Concordiat's reputation. Word spread quickly through the galaxy. The humans had not only refused to submit, but had humiliated the Concordiat's military might. In the Concordiat's chambers, panic began to set in. Their careful systems of control relied on the appearance of invincibility. Humanity hadn't just rejected their authority. They had exposed its limitations. "This cannot stand," Grand Arbiter Nexus declared. "If we allow this defiance to go unpunished, everything we have built will crumble. Prepare the extinction fleet." But even as the words left his mouth, reports were arriving of human ships appearing simultaneously in dozens of systems. Not the crude warships they had expected, but sleek vessels that seemed to bend space itself around them. The humans had not been idle during the years of isolation. As the Concordiat scrambled to respond, they failed to notice a more subtle danger. Other species were watching. Species that had chafed under Concordiat rule for centuries. Species that had accepted protectorate status and technology restrictions. Species that were now looking at humanity with new eyes. The Concordiat had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed that humanity, like all species before them, would bow to superior force and accept their place in the galactic order. They had failed to understand that humans had spent their entire history fighting against superior forces, adapting, innovating, and overcoming. They had dismissed humanity's fractious nature as a weakness, not recognizing that it had forged a species that thrived on challenge and conflict. They had seen humanity's relatively primitive technology as a limitation, not realizing that it meant humans understood their tools in ways the Concordiat species had forgotten over millennia of stagnation. Most critically, they had assumed that their current superiority guaranteed future dominance. They failed to grasp that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military might, but their constant drive to improve, to adapt, to become better than they were yesterday. As the first reports of human ships bypassing Concordiat defenses like they didn't exist reached Station Zero, Grand Arbiter Nexus finally began to understand their mistake. But by then, it was far too late. The galaxy was about to change, and the Concordiat's age of unchallenged dominion was coming to an end. In the dark between the stars, humanity's ships moved with purpose. They weren't seeking to destroy the Concordiat. Not yet. First, they would demonstrate just how badly the mighty Concordiat had underestimated them. The real war hadn't even begun. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Concordiat's primary quantum communication network went dark. Not with a dramatic crash or system failure, but with a gentle fade that was almost unnoticeable. By the time they realized what was happening, nearly 30% of their communication capacity was already gone. "Impossible," muttered Chief Technologist Vax as she studied the readings. Her crystalline form sparkled with anxiety patterns. "The quantum network is fundamentally unhackable. The laws of physics themselves protect it." But humanity hadn't hacked the network. They had done something far more elegant. They had introduced a cascading quantum decoherence effect that made the network's particles gradually lose their entanglement. It was like watching a sophisticated machine slowly forget how its parts work together. This was humanity's first real strike against the Concordiat, and it perfectly exemplified their approach to warfare. No massive fleets, no dramatic battles, no wasteful exchanges of firepower, just quiet, efficient neutralization of the enemy's advantages. The Concordiat's response was predictable. They activated their backup communication systems, ancient technology that had served as a redundancy for millennia. But these systems were slower, less secure, and most importantly, known to humanity through decades of careful observation. Within hours, Concordiat military operations were in chaos. Orders arrived late or corrupted or not at all. Coordination between their massive fleets became nearly impossible. The mighty armada that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years was reduced to individual ships operating almost blindly. But the humans weren't done. As the Concordiat struggled to maintain control, Phase 2 began. Small human vessels, barely larger than shuttles, began appearing near Concordiat outposts. They didn't attack. They simply watched, clearly visible to the Concordiat sensors. When challenged, they would disappear, only to reappear somewhere else. The psychological impact was devastating. The Concordiat's military had never faced an enemy they couldn't at least fight. This invisible, untouchable opponent that seemed to appear and disappear at will was something entirely new. Paranoia spread through the ranks like a virus. "They're toying with us," Admiral Krell growled during an emergency session of the Concordiat's military council. His tentacles writhed with suppressed rage. "They could strike at any time, but they're choosing to wear us down psychologically first." He was right, but only partially. The humans weren't just toying with them. They were gathering data. Each appearance allowed them to test the Concordiat's response times, analyze their protocols, and map their defensive capabilities. Every failed attempt to catch the human ships revealed more about the limitations of Concordiat technology. Meanwhile, in the shadowy corners of the galaxy, other pieces were moving into place. The Durrani, a species long subjugated by the Concordiate, suddenly found their planetary defense systems upgraded by mysterious benefactors. The Kithtal, whose technological development had been artificially stunted for centuries, discovered detailed blueprints for advanced weapons in their data networks. The Concordiate, focused on the immediate threat of human ships, failed to notice these smaller changes. They didn't see the network of allies and supporters that humanity was building. They didn't realize that their own heavy-handed rule had created a galaxy full of potential rebels just waiting for a chance to strike back. When the first real attack came, it was devastating in its precision. No planets were destroyed, no fleets annihilated. Instead, 3 key Concordiate supply stations simply ceased to exist, atomized by weapons that left no trace of their operation. The station's destruction created a logistical nightmare that would take months to untangle. The Concordiate's response was to concentrate their forces, gathering their fleets into massive battle groups that they believed would be impossible to defeat. It was exactly what humanity had been waiting for. As the great fleets of the Concordiate gathered, human vessels began appearing in civilian systems, offering protection to worlds that had suddenly found themselves abandoned by their former masters. The message was clear. The Concordiate could either disperse their forces again or watch their empire crumble system by system. We should have wiped them out immediately. Grand Arbiter Nexus raged in the privacy of his chambers. The moment they refused protectorate status, we should have destroyed their entire species. But his advisors knew the truth. Even then, it might have been too late. Humanity had been preparing for this confrontation since their first ships detected Concordiate signals. Every concession they'd appeared to make, every weakness they'd shown, had been carefully calculated to lull the Concordiate into a false sense of superiority. In the darkness of space, more human ships emerged from their hidden shipyards. Not the small vessels that had been harassing the Concordiate, but massive warships unlike anything seen before. They moved in ways that seemed to ignore the laws of physics, their hulls gleaming with technology that even the Concordiate's best scientists couldn't comprehend. The silent strike was over. Humanity had demonstrated their capabilities, mapped their enemies' weaknesses, and gathered their allies. Now it was time for the real war to begin. The Concordiate was about to learn why provoking humanity had been the greatest mistake in their 10,000-year history. As the first reports of major engagements began to arrive at Station Zero, even the most hardened Concordiate veterans felt a chill. The humans weren't just fighting a war. They were revolutionizing warfare itself, and they were just getting started. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula marked the moment when the galaxy realized that warfare had fundamentally changed. The Concordiate had sent their largest battle fleet, 15,000 ships strong, to crush a suspected human staging area. They emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons primed, their tactics refined over millennia of combat. They found 3 human ships waiting for them. This is either madness or a trap. Fleet Commander Zax transmitted to his subordinates, "Prepare for anything." But nothing could have prepared them for what came next. The human ships didn't attack. Instead, they began to sing. Not with communications equipment, but with their very drives. They generated overlapping gravitational waves that resonated through space itself, creating patterns that seemed to twist reality. The Concordiate fleet's carefully maintained formation began to break apart as local spacetime distorted around them. Ships that had been kilometers apart suddenly found themselves occupying the same space, their shields and hulls merging in ways that defied physics. Others were stretched across light years, their crews experiencing time at different rates. "This isn't warfare," one of the Concordiate scientists observed before their ship was twisted into an impossible shape. "This is artistry." The humans had taken concepts theorized by Concordiate scientists thousands of years ago and dismissed as impractical, then turned them into weapons of unprecedented power. They weren't just fighting with technology. They were fighting with the fundamental forces of the universe itself. But the true revolution wasn't just in the weapons. As the Concordiate reeled from their losses, humanity began sharing their innovations with their growing coalition of allies. The Durrani, natural engineers, took human gravitational manipulation technology and developed applications even humanity hadn't considered. The Kith-Tol combined their innate understanding of quantum mechanics with human AI systems to create predictive combat systems that bordered on precognition. The Concordiat had always maintained their power by keeping their subject species isolated, preventing them from combining their strengths. Now they watched in horror as centuries of carefully maintained barriers crumbled, and the species they had oppressed began working together in ways they had never imagined possible. "We need to adapt," urged strategist Venn during an emergency council session. "We can't fight this war with ancient tactics." But the Concordiat's strength had become their weakness. Millennia of unchallenged dominance had left them rigid, unable to change quickly enough to meet this new threat. Their ships were powerful but predictable. Their tactics were refined but inflexible. Their technology was advanced but stagnant. Humanity and their allies, in contrast, were evolving constantly. Each battle brought new innovations, new combinations of technologies and tactics. They didn't just learn from their failures. They learned from their successes, constantly improving even their most effective strategies. The Hexum offensive demonstrated this evolution perfectly. The Concordiat, having finally begun to adapt to the gravitational warfare that had devastated them at the Crimson Nebula, found themselves facing an entirely new form of combat. Human ships now carried devices that manipulated probability itself, creating zones where the laws of chance bent in their favor. "They're not just reading the book of warfare," Admiral Krell observed bitterly. "They're rewriting it with every engagement." But perhaps the most devastating evolution wasn't technological at all. Humanity had begun broadcasting their battles throughout the galaxy, not as propaganda, but as raw, unedited footage. Species that had lived in fear of the Concordiat for millennia watched as the supposedly invincible fleets were systematically dismantled by forces they had dismissed as primitive. The psychological impact was immense. Underground resistance movements sprang up across Concordiat space. Long, loyal species began questioning their allegiance. The Concordiat's careful system of control, maintained through fear and isolation, began to crumble in the face of hope. In response, the Concordiat attempted to demonstrate their continued power by destroying an inhabited world that had declared support for humanity. The explosion of the planet was visible across half the sector, but so was what happened next. Human ships arrived moments after the attack, their new temporal technology allowing them to save most of the population by shifting them milliseconds back in time, before the planet's destruction. The Concordiat's demonstration of power had instead become a demonstration of their cruelty and humanity's compassion. The war had evolved beyond a simple military conflict. It had become a battle of philosophies, the Concordiat's rigid control versus humanity's adaptive cooperation. And as more species joined the human-led coalition, bringing their own unique perspectives and capabilities, the rate of innovation accelerated exponentially. In their council chambers, the Concordiat's leaders began to realize a terrible truth. They hadn't just miscalculated in provoking humanity. They had accidentally catalyzed an evolutionary leap in warfare and civilization itself. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Concordiat was being left behind. As reports of new human innovations continued to flood in, Grand Arbiter Nexus made a decision that would seal the Concordiat's fate. Instead of attempting to adapt, they would unleash their most ancient and terrible weapons. Planet killers that had been banned for millennia. They would remind the galaxy why they had been feared for so long. But even as they prepared these doomsday weapons, human intelligence agents were already at work, their newest AI systems predicting the Concordiat's decisions before they were even made. The next phase of the war was about to begin, and it would make everything that had come before look like mere practice. The activation of the Concordiat's doomsday weapons should have been their moment of triumph. Instead, it became the catalyst for their final downfall. As the ancient planet killers powered up across Concordiat space, something unexpected happened. they began to disappear, not through violence or destruction, but through precise surgical strikes that seemed to pluck the weapons from existence itself. Human quantum infiltration teams, using technology that made them functionally invisible to conventional sensors, had been waiting for this moment. How? Demanded Grand Arbiter Nexus, watching as centuries of carefully preserved superweapons vanished. How did they know? The answer was both simple and devastating. The humans hadn't just been fighting a physical war. They had been waging an unprecedented campaign of information warfare. Their AI systems had infiltrated the Concordiate's supposedly secure networks so thoroughly that they could predict council decisions before they were made. But the true breaking point came from within. As news of the attempted deployment of planet killers spread, the Concordiate's careful political alliance began to fracture. Species that had been loyal for millennia recoiled at the willingness to use such weapons. The Concordiate's own military commanders, many of whom had privately grown to respect their human opponents, began questioning their orders. The shattering, as it came to be known, began in the Outer Rim territories. 3 major Concordiate member species announced their withdrawal from the alliance simultaneously. Within hours, dozens more followed. The Concordiate's response, attempting to forcibly prevent their departure, only accelerated the collapse. "We could have been partners." Ambassador Chen's message played across every communication channel in Concordiate space. "We could have shared our innovations, grown together. Instead, you chose domination over cooperation. Look where that choice has led you." The humans' masterstroke wasn't just military or technological, it was diplomatic. As the Concordiate crumbled, humanity offered their former members not subjugation, but partnership. Species that had lived under the Concordiate's thumb for millennia found themselves invited to join a new kind of alliance, one based on mutual respect and shared progress. The breaking point battle itself was almost anticlimactic. The Concordiate, its forces divided and its authority in tatters, gathered its remaining loyal fleets for one final confrontation near Station Zero. They expected a traditional space battle, a last glorious stand against their adversaries. Instead, they found their weapons refusing to fire, their ship's systems turning against them. The Kithtal's quantum AI systems had evolved beyond anything their creators had imagined, turning the Concordiate's own technology into a weapon against them. "Your choice is simple," the human broadcast declared. "Surrender and join us in building something new, or fade into history as an example of why dominion through fear ultimately fails." In the end, it wasn't human weapons that defeated the Concordiate. It was the realization that their time had passed. One by one, their remaining allies departed. Their subject species declared independence. Even their own military forces began standing down, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. Grand Arbiter Nexus, watching his 10,000-year-old empire dissolve around him, finally understood the true magnitude of their mistake. They had assumed that humanity's greatest weapon was their technology, their adaptability, or their military prowess. The truth was far simpler. Humanity's greatest weapon was hope. Hope for a better future. Hope for cooperation instead of subjugation. Hope that sparked other species to dream of something more than eternal servitude to the Concordiate. The final surrender was signed not in triumph or humiliation, but in quiet recognition of changing times. Station Zero, once the symbol of Concordiate power, became the headquarters for a new galactic coalition, one where all species, including the former Concordiate members, would have an equal voice. As the last Concordiate flags were lowered, Ambassador Chen stood before the assembled representatives of 100 species. The breaking point wasn't reached through superior firepower or advanced technology, she declared. It was reached when enough beings across the galaxy decided that cooperation was stronger than coercion, that unity was better than uniformity, that the future should be built together rather than imposed from above. The galaxy would never be the same. The Concordiate's mistake in provoking humanity had led not just to their own downfall, but to the birth of something entirely new. A civilization where different species worked together, where innovation was celebrated rather than controlled, where the strong protected the weak instead of dominating them. As the first session of the new Galactic Coalition began, even former Concordiate hardliners had to admit that perhaps their greatest defeat had also been their greatest salvation. The age of domination was over. The age of cooperation had begun. A year after the Concordiates' surrender, the galaxy had changed in ways that would have been unimaginable before. The massive ring stations that had once symbolized Concordiate authority now hosted bustling cultural exchanges where species freely shared knowledge and ideas. Former enemies worked side by side, combining their unique perspectives to solve problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. Centuries of oppression had left deep scars, and not everyone was ready to embrace change. Pockets of Concordiate loyalists still existed, launching occasional attacks that served only to strengthen the resolve of the new coalition. We expected resistance. Admiral Sarah Chen, now serving as the coalition's first security commissioner, observed during a council meeting. Change of this magnitude doesn't come easily. But we're not the Concordiate. We won't respond to dissent with overwhelming force. Instead, the coalition employed a uniquely human approach to peacekeeping. Rather than suppressing former Concordiate strongholds, they flooded them with aid, technology, and opportunities for cooperation. It was harder to maintain hatred when your former enemies were helping to rebuild your worlds and improve your people's lives. The technological renaissance that followed the war exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. The Durrani's engineering expertise, combined with human innovation and Kithtal quantum theory, led to breakthroughs that transformed galactic civilization. Faster-than-light travel became more efficient, energy production cleaner, and medical science advanced by centuries. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Species that had been isolated for millennia began sharing their art, music, and philosophy. The humans' love of storytelling proved particularly infectious, spreading across the galaxy and helping different species understand each other's perspectives. The Concordiate maintained power by keeping us apart. Kittel, a Kithtal philosopher, wrote in a widely shared essay, "Humanity showed us strength through unity. They didn't just defeat the Concordiate. They showed us a better way to exist." The former Grand Arbiter Nexus, now living under house arrest in a comfortable facility on Earth, spent his days studying human history. "We thought we understood power," he told his human guards. "We had the strongest fleet, the most advanced technology, the most rigid control. But true power, as you humans knew, lies in inspiration rather than intimidation." Education became a cornerstone of the new galactic society. The coalition established universities where different species could learn from each other, sharing not just technology, but perspectives and ways of thinking. Young beings grew up seeing cooperation and diversity as normal, making the Concordiate era seem increasingly alien and backward. The humans, for their part, worked to ensure they didn't become what they had fought against. They deliberately limited their own authority within the coalition, often stepping back to let other species take the lead. Their military remained strong but transparent, focused on protection rather than dominance. 20 years after the war's end, the galaxy gathered to celebrate the opening of the Unity Station, built on the ruins of Station Zero. Unlike its predecessor's cold grandeur, Unity Station was a vibrant blend of architectural styles from 100 worlds. Its halls filled with gardens, art galleries, and public spaces where beings of all species could mingle freely. During the opening ceremony, Ambassador Chen, now aged but still sharp, addressed the gathered representatives. The Concordiates' mistake wasn't just in underestimating humanity's military capability. Their fundamental error was in believing that strength came from enforcing uniformity. True strength, as we've learned together, comes from embracing our differences and learning from each other. The station's central chamber housed a memorial, not to the war itself, but to the transformation it had sparked. The names of every species that had joined the coalition were inscribed in a spiraling pattern, with space left for future additions. At its center, a simple message read, unity through diversity, progress through cooperation. As the galaxy settled into its new era, the story of humanity's victory over the Concordia became more than just a tale of military triumph. It became a parable about the power of hope, the strength found in diversity, and the possibilities that emerge when different peoples work together rather than against each other. The humans had not just won a war. They had catalyzed a fundamental shift in galactic civilization. The Concordia's mistake in provoking humanity had led to their own obsolescence, but it had also given birth to something greater than either humanity or the Concordia had imagined possible. As new species continued to join the coalition, bringing their own unique contributions to the growing galactic community, one thing became clear: the dawn of this new era was just the beginning. The galaxy's potential, unleashed by cooperation rather than constrained by control, was limitless. The stars themselves seemed brighter in this new age, as if reflecting the hope that had replaced fear as the driving force of galactic civilization. The Concordia's grave mistake had become the galaxy's greatest blessing, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't dominance, but the simple willingness to reach out and work together.